I was trying to bait you into telling me about one innovation from the past that we were referring to as finger condoms.
Yeah, it was like literally like the marketing was terrible. It was literally like rubber condoms, black rubber condoms onto fingers, and it was the picture of a hand with all five fingers with condoms on them. That's not how it was supposed to be used. You were actually supposed to cut the tips off and make the size that you need, so like you would cut it for the injury or where you want protection or more friction with that rubber. But obviously that image on the cover with that was terrible. But I mean, like it worked. If you did use it properly, like you could have tape where your wound was, and then put that on top of the tape, and you would get more friction than tape or skin. Yeah, it sold out not because it worked well, because I think it was just a novel, like fun gift for people.
Dude, the marketing worked perfectly. It's probably been like a decade and I still remember it. It's just like I didn't think it was that far out of left field. And again, you gotta let the community decide. But I'm poking you to just think about it. Just keep it in the crazy idea file that perhaps they could be something fun that comes out of that.
Yeah, I mean, we're always working on stuff, and like we've always done stuff with rubber. Rubber's been our thing for a long time, and how to apply rubber to different products. Like impregnating rubber into fabrics is another thing we're looking into. So imagine climbing tape with rubber already impregnated into it.
Kenny Suh, welcome to the Testpiece podcast, man.
All right, thanks for having me. Yeah, psyched to be here. Yeah.
Kenny, you are technically the sales and marketing manager of Mad Rock Climbing per the website, but it seems to me like you are one of the main people running the show over there with your hands and just about every part of the company. Is that title still accurate?
I'm gonna say no, actually. It's gonna be CEO, and actually we're gonna announce it pretty soon. So I do have my hand in a lot of different things, pretty much every department. But I think people realize it's a very, very small team. It's still family owned, so it's not this like big 100+ people, company that I have to oversee. Here at Mad Rock, I think it's 13 people full time here. There's other people that, you know, do outside repping, on the road or distributors, partners like that, but still very small. I guess CEO is the title, but it's, you end up doing everything.
Yeah, that is what a CEO does. They do everything, and I'm glad that. But by the way, yeah, I had no prep to realize that you were becoming the CEO. So congrats, man. Is this the let's call this the big PR release, man? That's really cool.
Thank you. Yeah, this is the first that we're going to release. Depending on when this goes live, yeah, it might be the first news about it for sure.
Cool. Well, Kenny, we got introduced because I have been interviewing Mad Rock athletes nonstop, and that's because they are awesome and friends of mine. And Kenny, they all spoke very highly of you and Mad Rock. And when we first got to talking, we realized that we basically started climbing at the same place at the same time back forever ago in the early mid 90s at a little gym in Davis called the Rocknasium, which was one of the first in the nation. And that place hooked a lot of climbers that have gone on to do amazing things. There was Beth Rodden, Keenan Takahashi, Vic Copeland, Mike Wickwire, Kenny Saw. And
Yeah.
anyone else you remember from back then, Kenny?
I guess Joel Rusher was there at the same time as I. We never actually crossed paths either. It's kind of an interesting thing in Northern California. A lot of big names went through Northern California, Rocknasium being one of the first gyms in the country. I think a lot of climbers had to go through there. So I was very fortunate to be in that, I guess, mid 90s, early 90s kind of like development of climbing in California. The funny fact that I don't think Beth knows, but we had the same math teacher. We had the same math class in high school in Davis there. So yeah, like just been kind of around since the mid 90s. Long time now, I guess. Jeez.
That is hilarious. Okay, Kenny and Beth, same math teacher. awesome.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's funny how these big names did come out of small little rock nasium, but part of it is just that the climbing community was small. There just weren't like a ton of gyms. So if you were there and you showed up and were dedicated, in some ways you were gonna be one of the best ones because the pool was kind of small. Actually, I don't want to take anything away from Beth. Beth is incredible. But yeah, it was a small crew, tiny place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've moved a couple times now. I think they've had to move to a different warehouse, but it's just like in the same area. I kind of miss the old like featured walls and the arch and that kind of things. But yeah, I mean, yeah, it's such a great place. I can't believe how many people went through there. We did a lot of events through there. I know when Beth and Tommy had that incident, like we did fundraisers there. I think Joel was there at the same time. We just didn't know each other then. So like the climbing community like was definitely ingrained in Davis for Tahoe, Yosemite, all those areas.
You know what gyms used to do better? Actually, I shouldn't say this. I don't know if they did it better. Maybe it was just more standard because the community was so small. I remember every Tuesday night there would be a barbecue, and I, I know that gyms try to do community building still, but maybe it was just like a natural outcrop. It wasn't like Mark and Squirrel sat down and said, we need to have some plan to increase engagement with our our members. It was just like they probably just wanted to grill up some steaks. And so yeah, good memories for me, man. Really good memories. Hmm.
For sure. Yeah, I hope they'd still do those things out there. Yeah, I haven't been back in a long time, but yeah, I don't know if you have.
Not in a while, but I'm sure they're still going strong there. I think Mark is still there. But
Oh,
yeah,
wow. Okay.
what an institution. Uh, Okay, well, Kenny, one of the big reasons I wanted to have you on today is that when we were chatting and you were telling me about the history of Mad Rock, just the myriad of connections it had with the other climbing shoe companies just blew my mind. I I think as a outsider, I just assumed that all these companies that you hear about were wholly distinct and never really knew much about each other and just kind of had their own little origin story, but it didn't sound like that was exactly what goes on behind the scenes, which in hindsight maybe it's not surprising because the industry is so small. But then I also read that article about Mad Rock's founder Young Chu, and that blew my mind also. So Kenny, I'm just psyched to have you on and have you shed some light about what goes on behind the scenes in the climbing industry because you have been there and done that for decades and yeah, helped shape what it is today.
Yeah, it's I think people have a big misconception about like the climbing industry maybe, especially people who are starting like now, let's say. I mean, they see all the mega gyms and they see it on TV now, Olympics. So when, people come visit our office or, talk about history, they're just kind of like still shocked at like how intertwined everyone's history was back in the day. I think people forget there weren't that many climbing shoe well, there still isn't now. I would say not that many factories that are making climbing shoes, but like all the designers kind of shared knowledge, worked together, worked on different production ideas. It was a very small community. I would say back in like the 90s into the early 2000s even like there was probably only like three or four last makers for climbing shoes that existed in the whole world, let's say. So I think like it hasn't grown that much. It has grown for sure, but it's not like in the hundreds. It's probably dozens maybe that can actually make a climbing shoe last. So when people talk about Mad Rock and like how like, oh, where did it start? Like there is some colorful like misconceptions also. Like we might have stole some designs or we would have done some shady stuff. But I think people don't know the real history, which is like we used to manufacture for a lot of these brands in the past. So there was a lot of like how do you say negative press about Mad Rock shoes in the very beginning. It wasn't that much different where we came into the market where climbing shoes were still expensive back then. Like we're talking in the late 90s, even the 2000s. There were above $100. Like I remember when I buy honest size and Velcros, 510 or $120, and that was kind of like the standard model, right? And then Madrock comes in with the Flash, which is our kind of like our first flagship model. That was back in 2001, late 2001, 2002 when we launched that shoe with some other shoes. But that was kind of like the honest size equivalent, and we sold that at $69. So that blew everyone's mind. Like, how can you make a shoe that cheap? There's got to be something wrong with it. What's going on with that? You know?
Well, I also want to point out that that price point of shoe in the over $100, I also was wearing Anasazi Velcros back in the mid 90s. They were the shoe and they were expensive. And to put that into perspective, $120 a shoe, I mean, we could talk about inflation, but also my gym membership at the Rocknasium was $25 a month. And so it just really shows you how expensive shoes were. And yeah, okay, I want to hear the origin story, but I also, before we dive into it, I want to hear how you even got into the industry. So you were in math class with Beth, you were climbing at the Rocknasium, you were clearly a teenager at the time. What made you get into the climbing industry? And yeah, or when did you get into the climbing industry?
Well, I would say like I was climbing since 95, 96 at Rocknasium out in Tahoe, but moved down to Southern California in 2001. So that was post college. I had grown up in Davis area. I went to Holmes Junior High. I went to Davis High School. So I just needed to get out, you know. So a couple of friends and I moved down to Southern California to kind of like start fresh, go to a new city. I needed a job with zero, job experience. What kind of job can you get straight out of college? It was tough. So looked around, looked at listings. Found a portable wall that was hiring for birthday party belayers, and I got that job pretty easy. There's no real interview. It's like, can you hold a rope? Can you show up? Let's do this. You know what I mean? So I got that job and found out that the owners were starting a climbing gym in Arcadia. And that was Jungle Gym. And Jungle Gym opened, I believe, in 2002. So, good worker, dependable, like to, be proactive. So they gave me the job to help starting to build out that gym. So help build the place, like talking about construction, like walls, flooring, padding, like putting floater pads together, all kinds of stuff. Started kind of there and kind of learned everything about the gym business through Jungle Gym there. Like I was front desk, belayer, eventually became head coach, head route setter, so I would say kind of like that's where I got the first start. And the first taste of the industry came when we started hosting these kind of bigger regional comps. This was back in when like ABS was still a thing, American Bouldering Series. I actually used to work with Scott, and both Scott Jenner and Scott Meckler, like was the, regional course setter for the bouldering comps and that kind of stuff. So, I mean, that was a lot of fun. It was a very small, tight knit group. I kind of really enjoyed that, like, kind of being in an outside cultural phenomenon, but like you're in this family. So it felt kind of cool, like you're not in the mainstream stuff, but you're still with the, group of, like-minded people, like good community. So I kind of like stuck with it. Yeah, so that I would say the vast majority of my climbing experience came from that one job. Like I was there from 2002 to I think 2007 or something like that. Yeah.
Dude, that's cool that you started out as a belayer for a portable wall, which was a big thing at the time. Like those portable walls, you'd see them at farmers markets and things like that.
Yep.
Magnesium did that too. Uh, I'm kind of curious what it was like building a gym back then. Did you guys there? I'm almost sure Walltopia didn't exist back then. Like, did you guys build your own walls? Like, how did you make padding and get all that stuff together when I assume the amount of vendors was much less back then.
Yeah, a lot of it was done. yourself. The owners did a lot of it themselves. We had Louis Anderson. He was a big prominent figure in Southern California. I think he used to be a part owner of Radwalls back in the day. He's a contractor, his main job, and he knew how to do construction, build other stuff. So he kind of took those skills and built walls in Southern California. I think a lot of the walls in Southern California at that time were built by Louis. So we work with him. He welded all the framing. The owner also helped as well and learned how to weld, like pretty much on the fly to get that gym up and running. Concrete pouring, like yeah, I gained a lot of construction experience from that job. It's not like the modular walls that we have now. It's real construction, I would say. Pretty messy job, you know.
That's really cool,
But
man.
that's how it was. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Just like, okay, we got space. Let's put up some walls, and all those. That was back in the day where, yeah, you maybe would have those kind of featured grooved walls versus just these modular flat panels all the time. And yeah, I don't know. As much as it's fun to romanticize about, I sure like the new gyms, man. I'm sure people who build the new gyms enjoy building them instead of having to figure it all out and reinvent the wheel every time.
Yeah, it was a messy job. Like we're talking like concrete on all the plywood, like steel lath, and put the like literally, put that concrete on there, and we would put buckets of paint at the top of the wall to make those water streaks that come down the wall. And we thought that was the coolest thing. Like, oh, it looks like Spain, or I don't know, like limestone. Just do fun stuff to make it look real, I guess. It's definitely different now, and I do appreciate the wall construction nowadays. But I mean, that gym's still up. The walls are still up. It's now a Hangar 18 location, but it's still in service. People are still calling in on the same walls that we built. Wow, like now 20 plus years ago.
Yeah, 20 plus years ago.
Yeah.
So what was the impetus for leaving Jungle Gym and moving over to Mad Rock?
Well, I had a pretty bad climbing injury at the gym actually. So I was route setting for running, did a stupid dyno move to the top of a lip on a cave. So I jumped to the lip, swung out, my hands popped off the lip, the top there, and then fell straight down. So I was literally falling, face forward onto the flooring. So I put my arms out and my arm dislocated. I don't know, it was a pretty bad dislocation. Had to go under. They had to, put it back. I mean, at that point, I'm not climbing for like, another year and a half, 2 years. So I had to get a real job. It was kind of a rough time for me. So yeah, looked around, was kind of unemployed for a couple months. But actually, right before Mad Rock, I got this corporate job. It was a travel flight center. It's now out of business, but that's where I gained a lot of corporate experience, like like training. I was doing like airline reservation systems, traveling a lot too, which was a lot of fun. Uh, but man, that life was not for me. Like customer service and like dealing with people's travel, not fun. So I had a friend who was at Mad Rock at the time. I think this was late 2007, and he was leaving. So he wanted to go do something else. Before they even posted it, he offered me the job. He's like, "Hey, you're sick of your job. You talk shit about it all the time. Like, you want to come work here?" I dropped everything and I quit that job and came to work at Mad Rock as a customer service rep. I was like, I was ready to do anything, to get back in basically. So late 2007 is when I kind of started here at Mad Rock. Yeah, that's wow, almost 30 years ago. Jeez.
Well, dude, it's worked out. Steadily. I love your willingness to just seize the opportunity, whatever it is. Whether it was belaying. I mean, I know it's kind of colored by, dude, I didn't have any other work and I just needed to show up. But clearly, you put your all into these entry level jobs because otherwise you wouldn't have continued to move up the ladder. And dude, yeah, now you're the CEO. Congrats.
It's crazy. Yeah. American success story, I guess.
That's why I called you out when I said all these people who have gone on to do amazing things after Rocknasium. Dude.
That's what it is. That's the yeah.
So tell me about, so you joined in 2007. You said that Mad Rock's first show with Shu was in 2001 or two, but Was that when Mad Rock was founded? Can you just share a little bit about the Mad Rock founding story?
Yeah, it was founded in 2001 actually, but we launched the brand at a 2002 winter trade show. It was the outdoor retailer. That's when outdoor retailer was a big climbing show for us. So we formed the company in 2001 and launched the brand in 2002. I think that was in January 2002. Launched with I think the Flash, the Mugen, the Loco. I think those are the three shoes we started with. Yeah, it was a massive success when we launched because, like I said, it was pretty much half the price of any other shoe that was out there. People liked the fit because it was very similar to what 510 was offering at the time. So yeah, we got right into places like REI. That was the big customer for us. Uh, at that point, like there's a lot of shoe brands right now, but back then, if you're a U.S. retailer, you're kind of like stuck with two or three brands you're trying to sell. So when Mad Rock came in, huge boom. I think we had massive growth when we first launched.
I remember the Mugen. I was in college at the time, and Steve Maish, I think I'm saying his name right, the guy who made West Coast Pimps, good friends of
Oh,
Joel Rusher and Jeremy Meeks. He had those, and Joel was psyched on the Locos, and he was like, "Dude, you got to get these Mugens because I like the Anasazi Velcro, and
yeah,
they were much more affordable to a broke college student like me."
exactly.
And something I remember about them is that they had this thicker piece of rubber along the edge. Am I right remembering that? I remember it was like kind of thick and then a little less in the middle, and it was supposed to help you edge better, but then be more flexible. I could be totally making this up
Dude,
on the
you're
fly.
totally right. Yeah, you're on it. Yeah, we used to call that the DDS sole. It was the dual density sole. And it had the first like horseshoe midsole and the horseshoe outer rim on the bottom of the sole. And it gave the bottom of the shoe a concave shape, which now we have the patent for. So, yeah, we started with that. It was kind of wild. It looked kind of crazy too. But yeah, that was on almost every model except for the entry level model, which was the Flash, I think.
So you said that they fit similar, or they had had some kind of similarities to 510. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I guess like I kind of alluded to it in the beginning. There is like we used to produce shoes for other brands, and I don't think people know that about our history. Uh, Big reason why is because we were like under NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, or we were bound to not tell people that we are producing for certain brands. But at one point, I think in the late 90s, early 2000s, we were producing about 80% of the rock shoes that were made in the world. So we were producing for 510, we were producing for Sportiva, La Fuma, Millet, Red Chili, well, Mammut we produced for. So we were the factory to make climbing shoes. So uh, I think there's a lot of like misinformation around like the 510 designs and that kind of stuff. People who know like 510 history know that Young Chu was the head designer and the factory for 510. Uh, 510 used to be made in Italy, through 70s, 80s, 90s. When, you know, certain things weren't lining up for that to be efficient to produce in Italy any longer. Charles Cole, who was the founder and CEO of 510 at that time, was trying to look for another factory to produce climbing shoes. It's hard because who makes climbing shoes like back in that day, but luckily like Young and Charles, they both were climbing in Yosemite at the time. Young is a fixture in Yosemite. He actually has a lot of like the first like Korean ascents of the nose, the separate reality, half dome. So he's kind of a rock star in his own right in that era. And he used to try to like challenge himself and climb all the hardest routes. And same thing with Charles. So it's going to be inevitable. They run into each other in the valley. They climb together. So they became fast friends. And when Charles had that production issue, he decided to go with Young. Young at that time was producing like bags and other like sewn goods out of his factory here in Southern California. He was making like bike bags and other stuff. I don't know exactly what other stuff. Um, I think it was all for the motocross like biking industry. Like he made Fox racing boots, Troy Lee armor, like the plastic armor stuff, the bike bags for giant bikes, stuff like that. So he did a lot of stuff for those companies. But I mean, he had the capability, right? So he had a sewing line. He knew how to make, climbing gear because he's been making climbing gear since he was 15, for his buddies, for himself. So Charles is like, hey, you have sewing lines. Can you sew me some shoes, some shoe uppers, and then we'll throw our rubber on it, and then yeah, we can make 510s in the USA. And that's kind of how that relationship started. And when the designs get, more complicated, they wanted to update the designs from like the Italian manufacturer to the USA production. It's not like you can take the same exact shape or whatever and make it in another factory unless you have the lasts or the patterns. You know, moving a factory or like choosing to go with another factory never goes well, I would say. Like, let's say me and you are working together and you say, hey, I'm going to go produce my stuff at another factory now. It's not like, okay, let me hand you all your tooling back, all your patterns back. Thanks for your business. Essentially, like you're killing their business, the factory that was making your shoes. So, what they had to do is create all new patterns, all new lasts for the new line of 510 shoes. And luckily, Young Chu has a very average US size 9 foot. So, and he's the last maker. Charles doesn't know how to make lasts. None of his team members know how to make lasts. And the lasts that were used to make those shoes that were made in Italy are like boot lasts, like the last that you would make hiking boots or other stuff, you
Can you
know?
explain to me what elast is exactly? Like, I think I know, but just because we're talking about so much, I want to make sure I really understand what elast is.
Yeah, so everything has to start with the last. The last is, I have one here. It's the form that the shoe is for people who go on YouTube. They could see the last. So you have to build a shoe around this last. So you can't just like sew things together and then have a shoe, an upper, let's say. They used to do board lasting. So we don't have a board last anymore. I don't think anyone does board lasting. So they would have a cutout of, let's say, a shape of a foot, but it's a board,
Mm-hmm.
and then you build all the upper stuff around the board. But it's like it doesn't account for the shape of your foot or curves or that kind of stuff, right?
I see. Just so I can describe it for people who don't end up on YouTube, it looked almost like a plastic, like a solid plastic model of a shoe if it was completed and fully built. And so a board last is would only be like the bottom of the sole, like only like the sole.
Yeah. So they
Okay.
would build the upper, the fabric around the board. And then, of course, like if the board is still also the midsole, that's why board lasted shoes, people would say, hey, get a board lasted shoe for edging.
I
Because there's a
see.
board in the shoe, basically. You know what I mean? But like, when we transitioned to the USA manufacturing, and obviously there were some, I don't know, like limitations with board lasted shoes. Like you can't get these complicated shapes or account for asymmetry of the toe or even downturn or the volume on the top of the foot. So like you have to come up with these new lasts, and you're not gonna basically build a last from scratch. The easiest way to do it is build it off of someone's foot. So you take a model of someone's foot and then make it more geometric, like the last year. It's not very. It's more anatomically correct than the board last, of course, but this doesn't look like your foot. It's still very geometric. So it has to start from someone's foot, and that was Young Chu's foot. US size 9, very average toe box, very average, foot volume. The only problem he had was that he did have a bigger heel. That's why the old 510s had baggy heels, because he has a giant heel on his foot.
Wait. Let me make sure I understand this. Just to repeat back to so 510 is having someone manufacture for them in Italy. for, and this is in the 90s, it sounds like. Uh,
Yeah, I think 70 through the 90s. Yeah.
wow. Okay. So
Yeah.
then, for whatever reason, they wanted to manufacture in the US. And because Italy wasn't so psyched, they didn't say, hey, here's everything we've used to help give you a head start. You had to start from scratch with 510 with Charles. So Young and Charles got together and said, okay, like we need to redo a last. And it happened to be, and Young too happened to have a average foot. And so does that mean that starting at that date, late 90s, uh, all 510 shoes and then fundamentally Mad Rock shoes too are based off of Young Chu's foot?
Yeah, I believe it's even pre 90s. But yeah, basically, like it started with like the Anasazi line, right? The Anasazi Velcro that turned into
Oh,
moccasin, which the dragon is the modified Anasazi. And then everything that came from dragon, high angle, whatever nowadays. There's some other designs that I think got kind of forgotten. There's like projects, the mesas, I don't know. They were all based off the Anasazi last. There weren't that many.
wait. Sorry, this is just really cool because I climbed in Anasazis when I was 10 years old. And then later on, I ended up in the Mugen. And then at some point, I also climbed in the Dragons for a while. And it's just funny that I had all these shoes that I loved, and they were all still like kind of fundamentally the same. Like, they all were
Yeah.
based off that original shape. Well, I guess I'm proud that I somehow found my way through the whole line and evolution. But okay, okay, cool. Yeah, let's continue. If there's more to the story, let's continue along with 510 and Mad Rock's manufacturing.
Yeah, yeah. So I think like 510 was produced in USA with Young's factory. So Young was producing 100% of the 510 shoes. There was a point in late 90s, early 2000s that Charles wanted to sell 510. I mean, Charles has since passed now. He can't corroborate the story or whatever, whatnot. But his idea was to sell to Solomon at the time, and he wanted to retire. Basically, he wants to sell to a big company like Solomon, take the check right off into the sunset, what have you. But Solomon didn't want to take just the brand; they want to take the manufacturing as well. So there's a conflict there because Young still wanted to produce shoes. He had design ideas. He doesn't want to hand his factory over to a big company like Solomon. What if Solomon decides all these production managers, you're fired, we're bringing in our own people. So he's like, no, I don't want to sell to Solomon. So what Charles had to do was set up another factory to be able to sell to Solomon the whole brand with the manufacturing. So that was around 2000, 2001, I believe. So he basically, Charles set up another factory, but they didn't know that they were being sold to Solomon either, as far as I understand it. They decided to part ways with Charles at that time. They became Yosemite Bum, which eventually became Evolve, which eventually became Butura, which is producing for BD, which I believe will be producing for some other brands in the future. And then, of course, from there, we had to kind of pivot because we weren't producing for our biggest customer, 510. We had to launch a brand. We have all these workers, we have all these people we have to feed and pay. So okay, like there's not much like demand for climate shoe manufacturing there in the late 90s, early 2000s. How about we just launch our own brand? Let's it's Mad Rock. So from there, we're talking about like we couldn't fulfill production capacity to 100% when we first launched the brand. So, we have to get more customers, more orders, right? So we go after people like La Sportiva or like, Mie, La Fuma, Mammut, like, hey, we have a factory. Do you want to make climbing shoes? We have some modern designs. You want to, incorporate that into your line. So that's where we became like the big manufacturing center for climbing shoes back in the early 2000s.
You guys were manufacturing for La Sportiva back in the early 2000s?
Yeah.
Wow, how long did that go on for?
That went on for until we moved our production to Vietnam. So we produce our uppers in Vietnam now. So when we moved, our brand was stronger. We were producing more shoes. We could, we could focus on getting a bigger factory, more sewing lines, retain the customers that we had. But at that point, I believe that was around, could be around 2006 or something like that, or even into 2008, I think. Um, there were definitely some other issues that we were dealing with. Like we had our own factory issues with copies, clones, that kind of thing. And we had moved some factories. And then, once you leave a factory, that factory has the capacity to make climbing shoes. They're going to try to survive, right? So they're
Yeah.
going to be like, hey, we can make your climbing shoes. So we're dealing with a lot of that stuff as well at that time. And we just couldn't handle all the different, orders or manufacturing stuff that was requested of us from all these brands, right? And the fact that there was some negative press about our shoes at that time. There still is lingering. It's cheaper because they use inferior materials. Bad rubber. Made in Asia, so it's got to be worse, that kind of sentiment in the industry. So I believe it was leaked in the industry at that time that we were making shoes for certain brands. And obviously, those brands didn't like that. They wanted to distance themselves from Mad Rock because, people perceive Mad Rock as being cheap, bad shoes, Asian manufacturing. You got to make it in US or Italy. So like with that and the factory change, it was a good time to just like cut ties with everything and just focus on our own brand at that time. So we're not producing for any other brand now, but we have produced for almost every brand that's been out there.
Jeez, dude, that web is wild. The chain of the chain of who Mad Rock produced for, and then the brands that grew out of it. Let's address that whole concept of being able to produce shoes for a lower price. And when Mad Rock started producing for for 510 and was making the Anasazis, we were just talking about how the Anasazis were being sold for $120, and then the Mugen came onto the market, within a year or two after that at, I think you said $70 or $60, roughly half the price. How
Yeah.
how did Mad Rock do that, and why were 510 so much more expensive?
Yeah, so there's a lot of factors. I think a big one is that like we are the factory going direct to consumer, so you're cutting out some middlemen there. The other big factor is that like we produce almost everything in house. So if you're a brand and you wanted to have climbing rubber on your shoes, where do you start? Like, can you make your own climbing rubber? It's probably hard to do. What are you going to try to do? You're going to buy something that's readily available. So if you have to buy a licensed, part to put on your part, the costs just keep rising. So rubber being like Stealth or Vibram, for example, or the other thing is like uppers, like the fabric that you're using. There's a lot of name brand fabrics that companies use. It's called Lorica or Caldura. 510 used to use Caldura. It was a trademarked 3M product. So you're paying for not just the product itself, but you're paying licensing fees to be able to put that tag on your product. So if you make a jacket and you want to say it's waterproof, okay, that's great. But if you say this is waterproof with Gore-Tex, people are going to be like instant, like I don't know, like what's the word? Uh, Confidence, right?
Yeah.
Like there's brand identity there, like brand history. They're like, okay, Gore-Tex, I understand. Caldura, I understand. That's a 3M product. That's going to be a reliable product. Stealth. So there's licensing issues. There's producing your own parts. That's another big one. Having your own factory. And just the fact that like our margins are not as high as the other brands out there. Young, when he founded the company and started the company, he wanted to make sure that climbing is affordable and accessible for everyone. you know.
Yeah.
So if you read the story, like he used to, you know, go around Camp 4 collecting cans, go to the, Yosemite Village, to see if he can like eat scraps off of people's plates, trade in his ice climbing gear, trade that back for the climbing gear for climbing season. So I mean, if he had to buy climbing gear, it was like a huge dent in his budget, in his finances. So he's very like familiar with that feeling. Like I want to climb, I want to do stuff, but I just can't get the gear to be able to do it. So that's definitely been like our guiding principle. Like try to give people the most value, the best innovation for the best price, and that's what hopefully we're trying to do now.
I totally ripped this off of your website. It said climbing should be for everybody. Is the is like the big bold thing, and it says innovative, highly technical, affordable climbing shoes and gear, and that is interesting. That because you guys don't have to deal with any middlemen, like you don't have to eat that markup of Cordura. You don't have to eat the markup of rubber. You don't have to eat the markup of manufacturing, and so then you guys, yeah, just do it all on your own. And well, I shouldn't say just do it all on your own. Manufacturing is extremely difficult and requires decades of experience. You mentioned rubber. Rubber is clearly something that is very, very important for climbing shoes. Can you just help me? I don't know anything about rubber, Kenny. Can you just help me?
So sticky climbing grade rubber is almost 100% butyl based rubber. It's petrol based. So there are a lot of ingredients in there that make climbing rubber possible. Because what do you want in a climbing rubber? You want it to be sticky, right? But you don't want it to be so soft so it can't edge on anything. You want it to be durable so you don't have to get a new pair of shoes every week or every month or whatever. So there's a lot of competing properties in rubber that we're trying to juggle, all these rubber brands, right? So you want to make a shoe that's sticky, but hard, and that'll last long. Those are things that don't mesh well together. You know what I mean? So if you make it super sticky, you're probably going to have a softer rubber. If you make it more durable, it's not going to be as sticky. So they're all in relationship with each other. So when you make climbing rubber, I guess with certain ingredients, they have different properties. Uh, like colored rubber, um, you'll see like in heel rands or toe rands or just for accents, like they'll be silica based, let's say.
Mhm.
It's not as sticky, but we're using that because it's more flexible, more elongation, that kind of stuff. So with all these different bases that you use is for uh, different use, different purpose. With climbing grades specifically, you have to reach a certain hardness for it to be usable in climbing situations. It has to have some elongation so it doesn't hurt when you put on the shoes. It has to have some sort of friction property, right? So it'll stick to whatever you're stepping on. I think it's very tricky to get this right formula, and that's why, like, other companies like Vibram, Stealth, like they try to say their formula is the best. It's they have the right combination of stuff. They're all very similar, I would say. It's just like little additives that are different here and there between the different brands. Um, Ours, I would say, is a little bit softer than the other brands. In overall testing, like our XF rubber or the science friction rubber is testing most of the time stickier than other climbing rubbers, but not always. Uh, Producing climbing rubber isn't, for us anyways, like so dialed in. I wish I could say it was. I wish I could say it was like temperature controlled in a lab setting, like everything's perfect timing, perfect temperature. Um, yeah, maybe if you had mass production, easier curing times, bigger machinery, $1 million budget, yeah, you can achieve that. But
So you said that this kind of sounds like there's a triangle of categories here where there's stickiness, uh, stiffness and durability. Like are those the three like components that you kind of have to play with, that you have to decide, okay, this is a flat shoe that people are going to want to have last forever and be good on small edged vertical granite. So we're going to lean into like stiffening. Like, do you add some kind of doping agent to make it like stiffer and more durable? Like, what are the what do you sprinkle in there to change which component? Or and I don't know if you can say everything, just whatever. I guess there's no. You said it's not rocket science, so maybe those chemicals that get added are well known in the industry. But I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think it's man, what do we do? We have to. There are certain ingredients that affect the rubber in certain ways, you know. And I think you're kind of right in the sense that sprinkling in is a good analogy. It is kind of like baking, you know. So people don't realize it's like you know, you can use natural rubber, synthetic rubber. You can add all these ingredients, but in the end, it has to go into a press. You know, climbing rubber has to be pressed. Um, and to achieve the hardness and the stickiness that you want, has to be cured with pressure, time, and heat. So those three things is kind of like baking a cookie, right? So if you bake it too hot, too fast, you take it out of the oven too quickly, you might have a really hard, crispy outer layer, but then the inside's going to be super gooey. It might be good for a cookie, but not good for climbing shoes. You know what I mean? So to achieve that right balance, you're playing with all these different variables: pressure, time, heat, and the additives that you add in. Like for example, sulfur is like a easy one that we can add to add more structure to the rubber. So you add more sulfur into the mix, that will align the molecules in a more organized way. It becomes harder, it becomes more stiffer, but then it has less elongation, so it doesn't stretch as well. It also loses stickiness. So we can use like stuff like synthetic resin into the mix to add chemical stickiness. There's also physical properties of stickiness that you need to consider, like actual rubber, like wrapping around the rock feature and grabbing something. And then the chemical stickiness also helps that as well, you know? So we're juggling many different variables to try to arrive at this right compound. And I think, you know, you have to have different rubber compounds for different applications. That's why, you know, other brands have edging compounds, indoor compounds, and we're doing the same with our XF rubber for our comp shoes, our regular rubber for like overall everything could be good. Our endurance rubber for rentals, you know.
So what you're saying though is that there's probably will never be some like perfect shoe with the perfect rubber that does everything perfectly, like from smearing to edging to lasting you for 5 years. It just doesn't, it's not quite how reality works.
Yeah, unless there's a new compound or a new additive that we haven't seen yet. Once you like take away from something or give something more something, it has to take away from the other, you know,
Yeah. Darn.
property.
I just
Yeah.
want it to be easy and perfect. I'm curious if you guys put different rubber in different places on the shoe, or when I say different rubber, I mean ones that emphasize different of these properties. Like, do you say, okay, well, the top of the toe box is going to see less rock, so we don't need to make it as durable, and we want it to be stickier or something? Like, you guys put different rubber on different parts of the shoe?
Yeah, even when we launched the brand, it was like you mentioned the dual density sole. We had the outer layer as a harder layer so that you can edge, and the inner layer was softer, so you could feel stuff. It would be a little bit more sticky. We do that on all of our shoes. Even our budget entry level shoes, it's a minimum like four different rubber compounds in one shoe. Even within the same part, we can have different rubber on different parts of the mold, so it can do different things. So it's a little bit uh, way more sophisticated than before. Like before, like you would have to like, let's say you have to press a sheet of rubber. You press a sheet and then you stamp out the shape that you want, and then you can use that to, um, you know, wrap the shoe or put it in different places and put it in the specific spot that you want to for it to do something, you know. Uh, with molding, we've been able to, I guess, like really get really specific of where we put each rubber piece. Like we want the rubber on top to be softer and stickier because typically you're not putting like your entire body weight on a very small surface area, so it doesn't have to have good edging property. Like, so we can really ramp up the stickiness of that rubber compound. We'll lose the stiffness, hard edging property, but it doesn't matter if you're doing a toe hook on that rubber. Should be okay, you know?
Good, because I need all the help I can get on toe hooks. I got to
Me
tell you,
too.
when you told me about like stamping out the things, it totally brought me back to the Rocknasium for a moment, which was where all of the, instead of nice comfy pads, it was rubber, old scrap rubber of the stamped out, not for climbing shoes, it was for like Tiva sandals or something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
uh okay, you said something about molding, we've talked about board lasts, and I could you just kind of tell me more about how shoes are actually manufactured, and maybe you can again remind us like how a board last works, and then now what you guys are doing with molding, which sounds like it's a little bit of an evolution.
Yeah, just to go back to the basics, I guess, like we have to start with the last. For last is always first. So this is where we start, and this is, I forgot to mention that we now pretty much do slip lasted shoes nowadays. So we're slipping a sock onto this last. I do have a sock here. So this is like the upper material that we sew, you know,
Oh, okay. Uh-huh.
and then this would slip into this last, you know, and then you could start gluing the pieces of rubber on, you know, all the or put that part on. So traditionally speaking, you have to stamp out rubber pieces, you know. Let's say this is like the heel rant, right? So this came from a big gray sheet of rubber, and then you stamp this out, and then you can use this to, let's say, wrap the shoe, you know, as the heel ran tensioning.
All right, I'm gonna try to describe this audially for those who aren't on YouTube. So the last was is again this kind of almost looks like a plastic volume of a climbing shoe. And then when you said it was like a slip fitting, it looked like these fabrics that were put onto the last. It looked like a sock, but those were the fabric components that are kind of that part of the shoe that when you put your foot in, you have your foot against fabric, not straight rubber. And then when you held up that heel cup as an example, or that piece of rubber
Heel rand,
heel
yeah.
rand, yeah, that's plastic that then you said you could wrap around that
This is
fabric
rubber,
component.
yeah,
Oh, sorry, yeah, rubber,
yeah.
and then glue it. So sorry, I just wanted to. It's good for me to repeat it so I understand the terminology as well as for people who aren't getting to see it.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, this is why different rubber compounds and different parts have different properties. So this heel rand is very stretchy. I'm kind of pulling it apart. It's almost like a rubber band, a big rubber band.
Mm.
So this is where you can tension the shoes, really force the foot to go one direction or apply pressure into the foot, get rid of some dead space or whatnot. So you could do that with tension parts.
Yeah, can you say more about tensioning and why that's such a crucial part of shoemaking?
Yeah, so I mean, like for climbing shoes, especially, like you need power in your toes. You're stepping on small stuff, small edges. So if you don't have that power, if you have floppy shoes or like loose fitting shoes, you know how that will go. You'll slip off, the foot will slip off. So how do you get that power in the toe box? You need to drive your foot to the front of the shoes. You need to create that tension around your foot so there's little to no movement so that that transfer of power from the rock to the shoe to your body is more in line instead of like the energy being lost in between all these mediums, you know? So tensioning plays a huge part in making performance climbing shoes. Uh, back in the day, like let's say when we're producing like traditionally made shoes, you would take the same last, same fabric upper, put it on the same last, but just tension the shoe different, and you have two different models. And that's how I think some brands are still doing it to this day. You would have, let's say, the Flash. You wouldn't tension this heel ran as tight. Let's say it's very loose. they're very comfortable. But then for the Mugen, or let's say the Anasazi equivalent, yeah, you pull it a little bit more. And then, oh wow, it's so much tighter fitting. I have more power in the toe box. So I think that was a trick that even us, we played, like just try to get that more power, more performance out of these shoes. But nowadays, like with molding, what we're trying to do is, yes, we still have to use some tension parts because we still don't have mastery of molding yet. I think we're getting there. We're still progressing. Um, but then we can add tension with molded parts by making things smaller than the actual part, right? So let's say my heel is bigger than this heel cup that we have. Like this is for you listeners, I guess this is just the heel cup, the drone heel part with the fin. It's 3D molded. It's just one piece. So what happens is if my heel is bigger than this, it's going to create some tension because of volume, because there's lower volume here. So if this is molded into this shape, instead of a flat piece of thing you have to pull, like this is already molded into a shape that's driving your foot forward. So we're trying to create tension by volume with molded parts, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so instead of stretching the rubber and then gluing it and kind of getting that pressure, just the part itself is shaped in a way that when you're, well, for this example, when your heel sits in there, it has a structure to itself. You're not like getting the structure out of stretching gluing. It already has it kind of inherently built in. Am I thinking about that correctly?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So like the toe box is very important, right? Let's say this is the toe box of the shoe. It's kind of hard to see it, but if this was the toe rand, we don't use toe rand on this model, but let's just imagine this is a toe rand. If you just put it loosely, you'd have a very boxy toe box, right? But as soon as I pull it tight, it's just going to create this like, lower volume toe box, and your toes would have to fit into a smaller volume. It's kind of the same thing. So we kind of do that with molding technology where you can see how pointy the tip is. So this part is intentioned, but it achieves the same thing, right? And why do we do this? It's because it's less labor and more consistent, right? So almost all climbing shoes are, I'm going to say all climbing shoes are still handmade. So from every company, right? There's no mechanization, maybe like the shoe press or the rubber pressing, but like putting a high performance climbing shoe together, you have to do it by hand. So if one worker, let's say, pulls this much and another worker pulls just a little extra, he's feeling buff that day, I don't know, she has her Wheaties, I don't know, a little bit more, and then you're like, oh wait, like this shoe feels different than it did, my last pair that I got. It's because someone may be pulling harder, or maybe they're pulling in a different direction or a slightly different angle. But with this comes out of a mold, pops out. You put it on, right? You put it on the mold, the shoe, and it's kind of consistent. Like it's harder to mess this up because like we have what are called guidelines where you have to match this up to a certain point on the shoe. So consistency, also like waste, right? You talked about the Tiva cutouts that you saw at Rocknasium. That's all the waste because when you stamp this piece out, where does that excess go? Climbing rubber can't be repurposed, recycled unless you do, upcycle it. You can't reuse it for climbing purposes, let's say, or climbing shoes. So you have a lot of waste. Uh, with this, you're using almost the exact amount of rubber you need for this part. There's almost zero waste here. So you're saving costs on material, you're saving labor costs because it's easier to put on. We're going to pass that savings on to the consumer because that's our philosophy.
Ah, that's interesting that I don't think I really realized, it sounds dumb, but I did not realize that every shoe was handmade. And that does make me feel better about me noticing that sometimes the same shoe, when I would get a new pair, felt different. Like, I would be like, oh, dude, this one's good. I like this one. And I would keep it aside because I don't know about you, but I would sometimes have a quiver of like three of the same shoes in different states of usage for warming up or sending.
Yeah.
Uh, okay, so this idea of tensioning, and when we talked about, I mean, I guess this applies to the heel coat heel cup, but I also think about with the toe box in general. I would say that climbers like to size down. Like we shove our feet into smaller shoes. I think that's maybe not as intense as it used to be. I actually remember getting Anasazi lace ups, I want to say, back when I was 9 years old, and they were so tight on me, but I thought they were the right thing to do. I would put them on and put my foot in water to try to like get them to stretch out, which now looking back, I'm probably just grew because I was a 10-year-old boy. Uh, this molding and making something consistent and having kind of the reduction in volume in the toe box built in, does that mean that this kind of technology allows us in general to not necessarily like continue to downsize to reduce that volume just by wearing a smaller shoe? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, we can like mold in like certain parts where you don't need the performance to relieve some of that tension or volume by molding in like knuckle bumps or, more ergonomically shaped molds. So like maybe we have more sophisticated toe molds than this nowadays, where it looks more anatomically correct. But over the big toe, we still have this slant because that big toe is very important. But like the pinky toe, we have a little knuckle bump, so it's a little bit less uncomfortable at that pinky area. But yeah, we want to get there. We've always tried to make performance shoes comfortable by molding. Um, it's still hard though because we need that tension. And how do you play with, you know, tensioning it right, but still be comfortable? But can we still stand on that small edge or grab that foothold? The other big thing I forgot to mention is that even if we got the mold right, it still wouldn't fit the same all the time. It's because of heat. I forgot to mention rubber is affected by heat a lot. So if you bought your shoes in the summer and you're like, this is perfect, and you bought the same model of shoes in the winter, you're like, this doesn't feel like the shoe that I bought. It could be perfectly, made exactly the same, but you're just trying it on warmer months, winter months, and it might feel different because butyl based rubber, climbing grade rubber, it absorbs heat and retains heat.
This is kind of a tangent back to the rubber area. I My dad was a race car driver, and he, warming up your tires was really important for stickiness. So I one day left my shoes out in the sun before climbing, thinking it would make things stickier. But then I thought I heard somewhere along the way that that's not how climbing shoe rubber works. Like basically, my question is what is the optimal temperature and the way to handle your shoes so that your rubber is performing the best it can on that moment?
Well, it depends on the foothold, right? So if you're smearing, like warm it up. Like if you're putting your whole body weight on the entire bottom of the sole, like I'll take the warmer, stickier rubber. You know what I mean? But if I'm trying to like do like the Bishop Classic with the dime edge or whatever, I need that rubber to be hard, or it will deform and roll. So I need that rubber to be cold. So I think like that's where like typically speaking, we're talking about harder grades, harder climbs have smaller holds, right? So rubber needs to be stiffer to be able to grab, hold that edge. So the old mentality was like, hey, you got to do this project in the cold, or don't warm up your shoes. Like you got to make sure the rubber is cold for you to be able to stand on this edge. You know?
Okay, cool. Okay, we're talking about old school lasts. Now we're talking about molding, and you held up this, basically a really large part of rubber that was almost like half of the shoe. You said it was molded, and so it wasn't stamped out. But you keep saying molded, and I just want to understand exactly what you mean. Like, do you have this mold, and then you pour liquid rubber, and then that's how it is shaped? Like, just help me understand what molding is exactly.
Yeah. So there's actually different types of molding as well. It's not just one. So you're familiar with Crocs, right?
Yeah.
Croc shoes. I'm sure people are. That is not the same molding process that we do for our shoe parts. So what they do is injection molding. So they'll have a like a mold. a cast, let's say, and then you like shoot the rubber into the mold, and then it'll form into that shape. Unfortunately, we can't do that with our shoe parts because ours use sticky climbing grade rubber. You can't make sticky climbing grade rubber flow. It just sticks to everything. So you'll have a lot of inconsistencies. Inconsistencies. Oh wow, air bubbles and that kind of stuff. I won't get to everywhere inside. So injection molding we can't do. And most of everything that you see, rubber parts, like I don't know, this kind of stuff, injection molded or like stamped out really quickly. Um, what we have to do with climbing grade rubber, if we go back to what we talk about rubber properties and how to make it, you have to use pressure, heat, and time. So you have to press it. So it has to be compression molded. So that's the big difference there. If you don't compress that, you know, that raw rubber, it's not going to form hard and you won't be able to edge on any shoes, any edges, you know? So if you take a pair of Crocs, can you edge on a dime edge? I don't know. Maybe Matt Bolts can, but I don't know. But not me. So I need the help of that climbing grade rubber to be able to stand on that hard edge and still get that stickiness. And you can only get that with compression molding. So this is why it's so revolutionary, like to be able to compress every part of this mold. Like I'm holding up the toe box here. How do you compress all sides, inside, outside, in the back? How do you compress everything evenly, heat it evenly? Um, the traditional way of making shoes with rubber sheets, it's easy to press a sheet. It's just a giant press and even heat, even pressure throughout the whole sheet. That's kind of easy to do, you
It's
know.
2D.
But how do you
Yeah.
do that with this?
Yeah, 3D. Yeah, much
3D.
different. Hmm.
Yeah. So compression molding is the only way to get climbing grade parts. That's why we do compression.
So you guys clearly know how to make shoes the old school way, and it seems like you're pioneering this new way. And it's there's less waste, there's consistency, there's ability to do tensioning well in a consistent way is one of the big things, and it sounds like it reduces cost as well. If you had to hazard a guess for 10 years from now, is are people going to be doing more molding to make climbing shoes, or do you think people will generally stick to the old school way?
Well, I think once it becomes more readily available, there are other industries that are getting into compression molding, let's say. So it's not just climbing. So soccer shoes, the top of the soccer, cleat, where they want more ball control and they're trying to compression mold some sort of sticky rubber on top to get ball control on the soccer shoes. There's other compression molding like projects from other big brands like Nike, Adidas, Reebok, those brands are doing it. So once that happens, it's going to be more readily available. And that's when I think the other brands will start adopting the technology. Right now, I think we do have the distinction of being the first ever fully molded 3D compression molded shoe. We didn't launch it, but we did debut it at the 2019 trade show. And then COVID happened and some craziness, of course, around that. But we were able to make a fully compression molded shoe. It was called the Vision. So we are working toward that vision to be able to fully compression mold an entire shoe. Um, and we are the first to kind of try to get there because what are most people going to try to do to get that fully molded shoe? It's the Crocs, like just injection molded. But we already talked about you can't do that with climbing grade rubber. So I don't think 10 years, yes. We already see other brands do smaller parts with molded parts. Um, like little things there, like the toe patch, or I see some heel molds that are being compression molded now. I think Boreal is doing like compression molded like bottom outsoles for the rental shoes. Like it'll just go like cover the toe area in the front. But that's us like 15 years ago. So we did that with our rental shoes 15 years ago. So we're already getting into fully compression molded shoes. We're trying to get there real soon. The other hurdle would be is cost. like the initial investment is very high. Because like with stamped out sheets, let's say if you have a sheet of rubber and you need to make a size 4 and a size 10 climbing shoe, you can make it from that same sheet of rubber. You can just cut out the size 4 heel ran, size 10, toe ran for the other shoe, and you're good. But with molding, you can't take a size 10 heel mold and put it on a size 4 climbing shoe. Um, that's why we have to commit to at least 5 molds per model that we make, because we're making a mold for 3 sizes, to try to cover all the different, foot shape sizes that are out there. You can't use one mold for every size. So opening a mold for each size, huge investment in the front, right? And then how big are those molds? So we first started with the heel cups. Like to make this piece, the heel cup, which is like, ball my fist size, the outer mold has to be, let's say, just slightly bigger, right? So you got to imagine there's an outer mold here that has this shape inside of it, and that's going to be about this size. And that's a certain cost. That's a very low cost. It's a very small mold. But once you get into stuff like this, how big is the outer mold of this part, which is the
Yeah.
entire toe box, almost going back to the heel? It has to be, wow, almost triple the size. And you got to have inner molds because it's pressing on the inside. How much is that investment? If you mess that up, like that's thousands of dollars wasted if you mess up a mold creation, you know?
Well, it's always we see these companies, not necessarily in the climbing world, but companies often die when new innovation comes. It's they're making money the old way, and it's hard for them to innovate. There's whole books written about why this is, but something that's seems to be really interesting with Mad Rock is that you guys seem to like to toy with the future, and you were just holding up that heel cup of the drone, which is kind of famous, infamous. I don't know. You pick your word for having a lip on the heel, which in certain circumstances really allows for a superior heel hooking experience on things that, well, the lip can catch on. And so I just am wondering, like, have you guys always had that ethos of pushing what is, pushing innovation?
Yeah, basically, we just want to climb harder and better, right? So, like, what can we use to make that happen? I mean, yeah, like, I wish I could just climb as hard as Adam or Austin, those kids, just fly up stuff, but I need
Me
every
too, Kenny.
advantage I can
Me
get,
too.
right? So, can I get some sticky rubber on the toe hook because my abs aren't doing so well right now and I need that extra stickiness? Sure, let's try that and see if that helps our climbing. So, I think like we try to push the lines a little bit, like the fin, this lip here you're talking about is like, we're all bad at heel hooks over here at Mad Rock HQ. It's like, how do we make heel hooks easier, and this is our solution, so like, hey, it works. Like, and I think the infamous comment was like, I'm not sure where it lands, like, do people think it's cheating? I've heard that it's aid, it's cheating. I don't know. I don't know if that. I think now that that's kind of been settled, like people accept that that's a great heel design. It's not cheating, but there is an element of like, oh, has that gone too far? That's up for the community, I guess, to maybe decide. But we'll keep pushing the line as far as we can. Like if we need maybe a hook on the toe hook part. We did do that in the past. We had shoes like the Hottie or the Hooker Lace, Hooker Easy. The Loco also had like hooks on the front, the top of the shoe. Um, it worked great for certain toe hooks, and it made toe hooking super easy on certain applications. Like you could just hang your foot on a feature and you didn't really have to engage your core. You could just let the foot hang. Is that cheating? I don't know. I mean, it was considered at one point. It was like our shoes were banned from competitions for a season, I believe, back in 2003.
Which
I
shoe?
believe it was the hooker.
The hooker.
Yeah,
Wow. Um,
yeah.
so I have this. funny thing that whenever I see something banned for professional athletes, like there's a doping list, WADA doping list, right? And this does not mean I just want to be a disclaimer. This does not mean that I encourage people to go out and take things that are banned, especially if you're competing, because then it's technically illegal. But I always have this interesting thing when an agency says, hey, we're banning this for professional athletes. If it's legal and safe, I'm always like really interested because I'm like, well, we know it works then because they're literally saying, don't do it over here. And so I don't know, the fact that you guys had a shoe ban is mind blowing. And I guess that is the community saying, hey, for this application, it's not allowed. And I want to point out that I'm I'm 95% sure on this. I hope I get this right. I'm pretty sure knee pads are banned in competition as well. Like sticky knee bar, sleeps. I mean, I always wonder, why do I never see competitors with knee bar pads on? And I'm pretty sure I'll double check this. I'll put in the show notes if I'm wrong. But so that just means it works, right? Like that's the sign.
Yeah, it was a stamp of approval basically from the organization.
Well, any other fun innovations you guys have tried in the past or have that you're thinking about for the future that you can tease or share?
Yeah, I mean, molding is definitely direction we're going to keep exploring. I think that is the future for climbing shoes. I think like all the stuff that you mentioned, is less waste, less labor, more consistency. The other part is like you could put more rubber where you need it, that kind of stuff. Like kind of like hot forged carabiners, you could put more metal somewhere so it'll last longer or it'll be stronger. We can do that with climbing shoes now, like move the rubber to certain different parts for more structure or durability, let's say. So I think like molding for sure. Like we're gonna keep going forward with that. We're still learning. I wouldn't say we've mastered it. But every model that we launch with this molding technology, we're learning a lot. So
Wait, I just want to understand that thing. That's really cool. This idea that you can put more rubber where you want it. So when I think about shoes, they'll have a similar thickness all around. We'll say kind of like the 4 foot toe box on the bottom, and then it'll be a completely different piece of rubber in say the midsole. Like, and that's how they get you to have less thickness in the middle because it's a completely different piece of rubber that they're glued together. But you could mold something where you say, I want this part to be twice as thick as this part and this part even a little thinner. And you can just all in one piece of rubber.
and you could put different rubber compounds in different parts.
That's
So
cool.
imagine the possibility, right? So I don't need too much support in my pinky toes, so let's put less rubber there, but give it a nice structure on the outside wall for it to push the toes toward the front, but give it the knuckle bump on top so it's not so uncomfortable. Can you do that with traditionally made climbing shoes? Yeah, to a certain extent, but you're doing a lot of jumping through hoops and cutting, getting a lot of waste because you're cutting pieces into different angles and shapes. Can you get different thickness? Yeah, you can always add rubber, glue it, you can grind it, but there's inconsistencies there too. Yeah, I think it is the future of climbing shoes. We're not 2D. Our body parts are not 2D. So if we can make things fit better and like give it structure or support or take away pain from certain parts of the foot, like that's how it should be.
Will there ever be a future where you could like 3D scan my foot and make a mold for me or for individuals? I know that would require like there's a manufacturing overhead of volume for each model, but is that ever going to be possible?
I think it's possible now, but I think the problem is you don't want to. I don't want to give too much away, but you don't want to just scan your foot and send it in, because is that how you're going to be climbing?
Hmm, I see.
So you need to put your foot into the shape that you need it to be in for it to perform well, and that's where the last comes in. This is why the last is so important.
Okay.
So that's the heart of the shoe. So you can't just send your foot in. Sure, we'll make a shoe that fits perfectly on a foot that's relaxed. That's not going to do much. You know what I mean?
Okay. Well, you gave us a little peek into the future. I was trying to bait you into telling me about one innovation from the past that we were referring to as finger condoms. Can you just
Okay,
tell us about
that's
that?
right.
I can't remember when that was, but I vividly remember that article and or ad and the discussion around them. And I just want to know if they're shelved forever or if perhaps they'll make a comeback.
They are shelved because I couldn't even find one for this for this interview. I wish I would had a piece lying around, but yeah, it was like literally like the marketing was terrible. It was literally like rubber condoms, black rubber condoms onto fingers, and it was the picture of a hand with all five fingers with condoms on them. That's not how it was supposed to be used. You were actually supposed to cut the tips off and make the size that you need, so like you would cut it for the injury or where you want protection or more friction with that rubber. But obviously that image on the cover with that was terrible. But I mean, like it worked. If you did use it properly, like you could have tape where your wound was and then put that on top of the tape and you would get more friction than tape or skin. Yeah, it sold out not because it worked well, because I think it was just a novel, like, fun gift for people.
Dude, the marketing worked perfectly. It's probably been like a decade and I still remember it. And when I say finger condom, everyone's going to know what I'm talking about. I
For
mean,
sure.
there is just this element that I found really interesting where who came along and said it's fine to wear shoes on your feet with sticky rubber? Like somewhere, yes, we have boots. I mean, we got guys like Barefoot Charles out there doing his thing without it,
Yeah.
and we see that as an anomaly. But is it an anomaly, or is that kind of the basic thing that we should be thinking of? And then we add on tools to it. And so, this idea of enhancing our grip, well, we use chalk already, and there's crack gloves. And it's just like, I didn't think it was that far out of left field. And again, you got to let the community decide. But I'm poking you to just think about it. Just keep it in the crazy idea file that perhaps they could be something fun that comes out of that.
Yeah, I mean, we're always working on stuff, and like we've always uh, done stuff with rubber. Rubber's been our thing for a long time, and how to apply rubber to different products. Like impregnating rubber into fabrics is another thing we're looking into. So imagine climbing tape with rubber already impregnated into it. You know what I mean? So, but then that's probably going to get banned from competition. If knee pads are banned, why would this not be banned?
But Kenny, I'm
Uh,
not in competition. I
but
need all the help I can get to keep up with Adam and Matt and Austin. Exactly. I need it in my shirt to be. I actually have Buddy. Just it was Max Zolotuk and friend of the pod. He posted a video of him. He put a knee bar pad around his whole waist and used it as kind of like a belly scum on the I think it was Wood's problem of V12 in Red Rocks. And
okay, yeah.
I mean, again, I'm going to quote my buddy Jamie Emerson, another friend of the pod, where there's no cheating in climbing, there's only lying. And so if you don't show, if I don't know, just like you're like, hey, my shirt was sticky. Although, dude, can I just have some like image of people walking around in 5 years with like skin tight body suits of rubber? That'd be a little weird, but I don't know. Who knows? Could be cool.
Yeah. I we will put out some crazy products, like, and then we'll let the community decide. I think that's kind of where we are. But we do have, like a guiding principle, like if it doesn't damage the rock or it doesn't affect the environment, let's give it a go, and then let's see how it's received. I think that's a good guiding principle. Yeah. Like we wouldn't use crampons on rocks, right? Like dry tooling or whatever on boulders.
Yeah, that exactly. Because when I said that quote from Jamie, it's like the caveat is that if what you're doing changes the experience for the next person, like it's if you say, "Hey, look, I did this climb, but I chipped the hold." It's like, okay, thanks for not lying, but you just ruined the rock for the next person, which is not okay. That's not okay.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
yeah, I have some issues with the current generations changing all the time, right? Like I think we just briefly talked about it in the pre-interview where like how far can we go? Like having fans is not damaging the rock, but that does change it from the experience from the, let's say, the first ascensionists? What if the first ascensionists had, 1970s Italian made boots, board lasted, and then you come along with sticky rubber, toe hook rubber, the drone fin heel. Uh, does that change the experience? Does that change the grade? That's, yeah, tough one.
It definitely changes the experience, and it made me think of when I did a pod with Greg Lowe, who was design. Was he the one who made the dragon? Was he part of the dragon? Am I
He
right
was a
on that?
big part of it. Yeah, I don't think people know that he had a big part in that shoe. Yeah,
Greg Lowe, big part of climbing, and
yeah.
he talked about doing or working on Midnight Lightning and how one of his friends, who then became not his friend, wrapped down the top of it to rehearse the
Ooh.
moves, and he was banned. He said, "We do not climb with that guy
Banned.
anymore."
Okay.
And but I think the thing that I see is that whether it's putting fans on, whether it's using crash pads, right? I mean, just crash pads, knee pads, whatever the case may be, is that as long as it doesn't hurt the rock, you can't stop people from doing it. Like, you are never going to stop them from doing it. And the argument I always have is that those new technologies, again, whether it's fans or crash pads, yes, it can diminish, oh, maybe not diminish, it will change the experience of doing something like Midnight Lightning. But Ron Kauk did not do Too Big to Flail, which is, or Evolution, which is a notch above. And so I think that these new things that guys like you and Mad Rock invent, or people coming up with pads or using Makita fans, all that stuff, just it allows experiences to the same intensity or wildness on new playing fields that maybe are taller, more difficult, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, and I think like going back to what Jamie was saying, don't lie about it. If you did it with fans and whatever, yeah, just yeah, that's let it be known. But I think like the guiding principle that I look at is like the style. Like this guy sent it with original beta, with no crash pads, with no rehearsing. This guy did it with all that, same grade, but who did it in better style? I think that should still matter, and that's kind of getting lost a little bit in the newer generation. I think it's what's happening is like I just need the grade. I just need to get on top of this thing, no matter how, like what tactics I use. I just need to get to the top. You know, there's people out there, pro climbers that I really do, respect that still keep to that sense of style when they do boulders or climbs.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think there is an element of insider baseball where, like, if you know, you know, and that's kind of fun to understand what the things were around that ascent versus just whether it was a check mark or not. And, you just mentioned that there are certain climbers that you really appreciate their style. And I started out the pod by saying I met you, Kenny, from talking to all the athletes that you guys work with. And actually, before we even talk about that, I just want to shout out Adam Shahar for joining the team. And that video dropped recently of a welcome to the team. And it was a banger video. I love Adam. Did a podcast with him. So congrats to Adam. Cool to see him on board with you guys. But tell me more about why you work with the athletes you do.
That kid is insane, you know? Basically, I mean, like we look at athletes and I think who's determined, you know? There's certain people that reach out that I would say they may or may not do what they say they're going to do. And it's all depending on sponsorship, depending on money, depending on some other exterior, factor, right? Let's say I took all that away from an athlete. Are they still going to make the trip? Are they still going to be out there? Are they still going to be trying? We kind of look for that, and I think our the athletes who are currently on the team exemplify that. Like even if I weren't supporting them, I'm pretty sure I would find these guys out there doing what they love, doing what they want to do. We typically try to shy away from people who put conditions on everything. Like I'll do this if you do this for me. I'll do this if you do that. We typically want to partner with people like that are going to be, I'm going to do this no matter what. Do you guys want to be along for the ride? I'm like, dude, I'm down for that because I know they're going to come through. I know they're going to, make the effort, put in the time. So I think that's the biggest attribute that we look at for people who are looking for a partnership.
Dude, that's just such good advice in general for, I mean, for life, but we'll just keep it to climbing since we're a climbing podcast. Where, dude, if you want to find excuses for why you didn't send or whatever the case, why you weren't in shape, they're out there. Don't worry, you can find a great excuse,
For
but
sure.
that just doesn't matter. Like it, no one cares. No one. Well, you don't care either. You don't feel good about having a good excuse for why you didn't send. The only time I'll say that I feel good when I fail is when I know I literally hung it all out there. And honestly, you don't feel that bad after that. You're like, yeah, I didn't send, but I had nothing else, and I gave it my all, and this is what happened.
Yeah.
Oh,
At least you know, right? Like there's no not knowing. Like if I would have went a little further or stayed a little bit later, I could have sent maybe, but you went max 100%. You found out. I think I respect that a lot.
yeah, it's something that I've given advice a lot to. I guess on this podcast in some of the early days was I read Dave McLeod's book, 9 out of 10 climbers make these mistakes. And the one that I always thought about was pro climbers try their project one more time than you do. And it's
That's the difference,
interest.
right?
It's well, what's interesting though
Yeah.
is I think what I always took from that is that what was that one more time? You never know. It's like, was that, did I just do the pro climber try or should I try again? And just, I would just continue, I'd really continue to try until I sent. And I always kind of prided myself on someone who, when I knew I could do something, I, I did it,
Hmm.
and yeah, I don't know. Well, now I know why I like the people you work with as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think the other part that people don't realize is like all these guys and girls that we sponsor, it's like they have another characteristic that we look for is like, can they put it together and then actually follow through? It's like putting together a puzzle. And I think some people just kind of, let's say you have that last puzzle piece or couple pieces and you're trying to like do it every other way, right? To try to make it fit, and you happen to get it to fit. There's a lot of climbers out there that happen to make it fit, let's say, happen to send or happen to make something happen. But the people who are successful are like, dude, I know where this piece goes, how it's oriented, and I'm gonna put it in. I'm gonna finish the puzzle. And that's that mentality that I see in a lot of the pro athletes that are successful is like they've done everything, they know what's going to happen, and they know what to do to execute, and they just finish that puzzle. It's not a random occurrence. It's like they put in the work. There's that foundation there. And I think a lot of the kids these days, like, they think you just have to go out there and just try, try, try. Yes, that's a part of it, but you have to learn from that, and you have to like kind of you have to be efficient, right? You have to be efficient with your tries, your season, your trip. A lot of these pros are really good at dumbing down things, making things doable, instead of just like, does it fit this way, this way, this way, this way? I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a lot of what this podcast is about. This little je ne sais quoi that is good to great is there's people out there. I was going to say there's people out there who are just as strong as Adam Shahar. And I was like, maybe there aren't actually. So maybe Adam's not the perfect example, but there are quite a few extremely strong and talented climbers in the world. But that is just necessary, but not sufficient to be one of the best.
Yeah. And I think this generation and moving forward, you have to be more than just a good rock climber. I think that's kind of the old mentality. I just climb hard, people write about me, people do a film, and I get sponsored, and that's it, right? I think it is a job, and I think some people forget that, and they have to provide, reciprocate, the support. I think it's changing. The younger kids are maybe better coached by their coaches or better mentors. It's definitely evolving the level of professionalism that's happening. But it's still another thing that I do come across where it's like, hey, I climbed this grade. Why are you not throwing money at me? I'm like, oh, it's not just that simple.
No one ever throws money at anyone. Well, then I'll just do this as a PSA to everyone out there. I think part of being a professional is being out there in the world, sharing your process. And so if you are a young gun who is, doing your best, come on the pod, share your experience. I love talking to guys like Adam, guys like Austin, and something that does make them special is that they're out there. I don't want to say making a name for themselves, but it's like, well, you want to know what Adam's like? Go listen to the podcast. That's him. Go out and see
Yeah.
him in the boulders. And I just think that yes, he's crushing. Yes, they're all crushing, but taking that extra step to show up in the world is important in today's, climb's getting bigger. That's part of the job, as you said.
Yeah, it's huge. Yeah.
Okay, Kenny, that is a perfect segue into my classic question. And that's, Kenny, how do you go from good to great?
Okay, so you know, we I kind of look at this like for not just climbing, but for designs, climbing shoes, business, whatever it may be. It's you have to value progress over perfection, and I think a lot of people get hung up on being perfect or waiting for perfect conditions, waiting for perfect situations. You have to value progress over that perfection. So uh, even with shoe design, like yes, when we made the drone 2, it wasn't perfect. We know that there's some, like shortcomings that may be different from the OG drone, but we made progress. Uh, we learned a lot about molding. We learned enough to launch the D2-1, the drone CS. There's going to be more drone models, and we're progressing toward that vision that we have. If we waited until we had the perfect model, man, we would never launch anything. We wouldn't launch a single shoe. You know, Same thing with climbing. We're wait for the perfect conditions, perfect time, perfect. I need my perfect spotter, my perfect pad. Dude, you're not going to learn anything. You're not going to progress. Like, take the small wins. Some people would say the drone 2 is not a win. Like it's massively popular for us. It's been a good seller. But some die-hard original drone fans like, oh, you guys are going backwards. This molding technology doesn't work. But I'm looking at it like, look, just wait. 3 to 5 years from now, you're going to get a better drone than the OG drone because we learned so much from these drone 2s, 2.1s, 2.2s. Um, if you didn't do that, like, how do you get better? I can't wait for the perfect time for the perfect model.
Good advice. And it just makes me think if you had sat there and been like, I don't want to work for Mad Rock until they offer me the CEO position, instead of just saying, I'm going to start and I'm going to move forward each day. And yeah, dude, progress is everything. It's just everything.
Yeah,
And also, I got to tell you, it kind of goes hand in hand with this thing that I always think of as a bias towards action. Like, yeah, don't sit around and hope. Get out there and do stuff. And it's worked for you, man. It's worked great.
yeah.
Okay, I got one more question for you that I've now added into my typical litany of questions, and it's a it's a good one for you because you are in the industry, and that's what is something in your climbing kit that you just cannot leave home without, Kenny?
Ooh, I don't think I'm ready for this one. A
Good,
piece of
good.
climbing kit that I can't leave at home. Wow. I'm pretty minimalist, I would say. Shoes, chalk, food, and water. Um, but the thing that actually, like, I have a huge collection of brushes. Uh, I love to brush. It's not just to keep the rock clean or whatever. It's yes, that's important and for the best conditions and all that. But it helps me stop. The act of brushing and the procedure of brushing, like, makes me rest between burns. Let's say, think about the move. How would I want to hold hold, or how do I approach this climb? Um, yeah, I would say that's pretty key. If I didn't have one, I'd be like fidgeting, like I need to brush something or do something with my hands.
Which one? Which one is your favorite brush?
Oh, dude, it's like asking for a favorite song. I don't know, or favorite movie. You can't just have one. So I mean, like, yeah, like you got to have a whole collection. Like, to build it up. You got to build up the small one for the pockets that fit into smaller stuff. Big one for the slopers. Sometimes you got to carry a broom for like getting all the debris off the top of a boulder. You can't just have one. buy it all.
Nice, man. Oh, that's good stuff. Kenny, it was a blast. And well, first of all, congrats on a successful career in the industry. And again, for helping shape it and continuing to push it forward. That was fascinating. But then also, thanks for coming on and just shedding some light on behind the scenes. Shoes are, I mean, you guys make more than just shoes at Mad Rock, but shoes are a big part of what we use as climbers. They are, I
Oh,
don't
for
know,
sure.
man. Yeah, if there was one thing in your climbing kit you can't leave home without, it's probably your shoes. Uh,
Yeah.
and so I had no idea how they're made. I had no idea how anything about rubber. And then I also didn't understand those links between Mad Rock and all the other shoe manufacturers ever. And so I really appreciate you coming on and just, yeah, sharing all your knowledge, man. It was really fun.
No, I had a blast. Just barely scratched the surface though. There's so much more. I have so many things on my desk I was ready to talk about, but yeah, we'll save that for another one. But yeah, there's a lot that goes into it.
Well, I like how you teased a part two there. Sounds good, Kenny.
All right.
All right. Take care, man.
Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like even more content, go to patreon.com/testpiece. And while you're at it, share this podcast with someone you know who would love it. And please leave us a review or rating at wherever you get your podcasts. We've also got tons of great content on YouTube and Instagram, so don't forget to like and subscribe there. Okay, see you next week.